Tonight it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Emily Austin to St. John's College. Dr. Austin is an associate professor of classics and the college at the University of Chicago. She received her doctorate from Boston University with a dissertation, Grief, Longing, and Anger, a study of emotions in the Iliad. She has published extensively on Homer, especially on emotions as depicted in Homeric poetry, and more recently, on literary depictions of solitude in ancient Greece. Her first book, Grief and the Hero, The Futility of Longing in the Iliad, explores the nexus of grief, longing, and anger in the Iliad. She is currently working on a second book, Solitude and Its Powers in Ancient Greece, which identifies moments when ancient Greek poetry conceives of solitude as a good thing. She is the happy daughter of two Johnnies who taught her to cherish good books and great conversation. Dr. Austin's lecture tonight is titled The Power of Solitude in Sophocles Philoctetes. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Austin to St. John's.
Thank you so much. It's really wonderful to be here. I apologize, I'm a little stuffed up, so I'm gonna try to speak slowly so that I'm clear, but let me know just wave a hand if you've missed something. It's a real pleasure to work on this topic, solitude. It's in many ways, timely. It's always been timely, I think, but my experience of working on this topic is that I'm almost daily sent an article or a podcast on sort of something related to this, our culture's maybe deepening sense of isolation from one another, the superficiality of phone-mediated relationships. There was even a recent article in The Atlantic, which I recommend, on the importance of feeling lonely, because if we don't feel lonely, we won't try to seek out relationships with other people. We won't realize without that experience that we need others. Anyway, it's timely, and my angle here as a classicist is to see as best I can how ancient Greeks thought about solitude. And the ancient Greeks, they were not systematic in talking about this. So I hope that this is going to be very exploratory, trying to tease out something from a play that didn't primarily seek to explain how they were thinking about it, but I'm very grateful to be here and for this opportunity to think through this with you. So I would like to begin tonight's lecture with a passage far removed from Sophocles Philoctetes. This passage comes from a letter by the poet Rainer Maria Rilke, written to a young poet on December 23rd, 1903. He says, "There is but one solitude, and that is great and not easy to bear. But that must not mislead you. The necessary thing is, after all, but this: solitude, great inner solitude, going into oneself and for hours meeting no one. This one must be able to attain." The context for this letter is the addressee's experience of holiday loneliness, something many of us may have felt. Rilke sees in this loneliness an opportunity for great achievement, to attain being alone with oneself for hours at a time. Rilke frames solitude as a great and necessary part of human existence. And this framing would, I think, resonate little with a figure of antiquity. And we'll get to that. But I find in this 20th century exhortation to attain solitude remarkable and useful. It opens up a conceptual space in which we can explore a singular ancient example of solitude's generative power, the heroism of Sophocles Philoctetes. So I know that some of you may have just read it this week. Anybody? Yeah, Okay, great. So Philoctetes' Solitude is striking. The Sophoclean hero is, without exaggeration, the loneliest figure in the ancient Greek literary corpus. At the same time, however, Philoctetes' Solitude is, on his own account, the source of his unique excellence. So for those of you who didn't just read it this week, I'm going to briefly recap the story. So this play, Sophocles Philoctetes, was performed in Athens at the city Dionysia in 409 BC, where it won first prize. And it takes place in the 10th year of the Trojan War. So the Greeks have received a prophecy that Troy will not be taken without the bow of Philoctetes, and it seems Philoctetes himself. And this is a problem for the Greeks, since 10 years ago, on the way to fight at Troy, they abandoned Philoctetes on an uninhabited island, Lemnos. They abandoned him because on the way to Troy, Philoctetes had received a snake bite on sacred ground, and the incurable wound from this bite is producing constantly in this hero these horrible fits of agony and a really horrible stench. They can't handle it. So the Greeks, who are led by the brothers Agamemnon, Menelaus, and by Odysseus, they leave Philoctetes alone and suffering on the island, and they go on to Troy without him. So this play of Sophocles begins with Odysseus returning to the island of Lemnos with this younger warrior, Neoptolemus, who's the son of Achilles, who is dead at this point in the war, in order to either persuade or trick Philoctetes to return to Troy with his bow. So these are the main characters in the play: Odysseus, Neoptolemus, and Philoctetes. And what we learn when we get to the island is that Philoctetes has survived alone on this island for 10 years, thanks to, he says, his enduring heart and his magical bow. And this bow he received previously as a gift from Heracles. So Philoctetes spends the play pleading with Neoptolemus to bring him home, despite the foul smell of his wound and his disagreeable fits of pain. And he appeals to Neoptolemus as the son of a noble friend, Achilles, to Philoctetes, and therefore a potential friend in his own right. Odysseus, on the other hand, is using Neoptolemus as a pawn in his attempts first to trick and then to force Philoctetes to return with them to Troy. Neoptolemus pities Philoctetes' condition, but continues to serve Odysseus, convincing Philoctetes to let him handle the bow and nearly leaving the island with it. And then with a sudden change of heart, however, he returns the bow to Philoctetes, and once Philoctetes has the bow in his possession, Neoptolemus tries to convince him to freely go to Troy. And finally, the intractable Philoctetes persuades Neoptolemus to bring him home. And at this moment, the god Heracles appears, ex machina, and tells Philoctetes, you have to go to Troy, where you will be healed, and you'll gain great glory in the sack of Troy. So this is the plot. And I want to be completely clear in this lecture. Philoctetes' solitude was forced upon him and was largely horrific. In the play, he despises his solitude, and he suffers greatly in his isolation. Yet, he also frames his time apart with language of unique heroism. And this contrast, the way he frames it, contrasts with the Greek army's normative values of achievement. Philoctetes performs no heroic deeds of warfare during his time on Lemnos, nor does he have any community to recognize his excellence. Yet he frames his time alone, suffering, and with a limited ability to act in terms of glorious renown. This remarkable framing of solitude as a means of heroism is all the more striking when we consider the ancient context. Sophocles' play was performed at the city of Dionysia in Athens, which is a huge public festival that we could say embodies the highly civic public life typical of the Athenian polis. So this is a radical democracy. You've got huge numbers of adult male citizens gathering to govern their city, to vote, to judge. And Aristotle in the Politics, he famously describes the man who is incapable of living in society, or who is so self-sufficient that he does not need to, as either a beast or a god. So this is the context for Sophocles' play, an environment that's saturated with a public mindset and whose audience understands virtue and excellence as something thoroughly civic. Even in the world of Homer, which is the ostensible context of the play, which is more individualistic, you might say, because it's the individual hero winning honor, in order to have that honor be real, it has to be recognized by the community. So it's a very public context. And I think this is important because we are citizens of the 21st century. And I would say that we have, by and large, been raised with a private sense of self-worth. Many of us have been raised to value self-sufficiency. And this is not true for a Greek of Sophocles' time. And so one of the things you see in the play and elsewhere in ancient Greek is that solitude is often associated with death. In the play, this occurs many times. Philoctetes compares his extreme sufferings to death. He describes himself as a corpse, a living corpse, not a person. And he also pleads for death at the dramatic crisis of pain before he falls asleep. Yet his experience of solitude, it also generates a possibility that's unique to his isolation. So this is what I'm calling generative. His solitude is generative even though the goods achieved are partial and coexist with harms. What I find remarkable in this play is that this hero frames his survival alone and wounded for 10 years as a form of unmatched heroism. And I just want to briefly distinguish the solitude of Philoctetes from the sort of typical isolation of Sophocles' heroes, because they are famously isolated. Bernard Knox, in the 60s, has a book called The Heroic Temper, where he directly associates their aloneness with heroism. He says, the Sophoclean hero acts in a terrifying vacuum, a present which has no future to comfort and no past to guide, an isolation in time and space which imposes on the hero the full responsibility for his own action and its consequences. This is still Knox. It is precisely this fact which makes possible the greatness of the Sophoclean heroes. The source of their action lies in them alone, nowhere else. The greatness of their action is theirs alone. So this is a very sort of iconic way of understanding Sophoclean solitude. And so for this guy, Knox, the greatness of the Sophoclean hero lies in the radical aloneness with which he or she acts. On his account, their isolation begins in intransigence, which separates them from their communities, leaving them to carry the burden of their action alone. And this is clearly right to some extent. But it is also the case that Philoctetes relates to solitude in a unique way. So just to pull this out, I briefly want to look at Antigone and Ajax. And I didn't ask. Have you guys read Antigone and Ajax? And yes, Antigone? Ajax? Some, great. It's not essential. This is really brief. But so in these plays, these are very, very solitary Sophoclean heroes. But the heroes are alone as a byproduct of their conditions or choices. So Antigone, solitude doesn't come first. The first thing we see in the play is that she wants her sister to join her. It's not the solitude itself that makes her great. Her commitment to act as she deems right is what makes her great, makes her intransigent, and brings about her major isolation. Philoctetes' experience of solitude and heroism is different in kind. This is what I want us to think about. Solitude is like the content for Philoctetes. It precedes and enables what he attains. On his presentation, what he achieves is enduring and living in isolation. And in this, he's also strikingly different from another solitary tragic hero, Ajax. So Ajax is similarly isolated. You can really think about these two characters in parallel, but Ajax's isolation comes more from within. He's unable to broaden his understanding of heroism, of relationality, to encompass other relations and modes of being. So for him, it's all about being the warrior. It's all about being the warrior, and he can't handle any other way of thinking about virtue or excellence. So it's like we're always talking now in like pop psychology about reframing, right? Ajax cannot reframe. He can't reconceptualize heroism in the way that Philoctetes really does, and which allows Philoctetes to endure suffering and isolation. So with this brief context, let's turn to the Philoctetes to draw out the hero's unique claims to heroic endurance of solitude. It is a striking rewriting of heroism in this play. Philoctetes has no deeds of war, no heroic attainments in the typical active sense of the word. Much like Rilke's strange framing of going into oneself and for hours meeting no one as something to be achieved, Philoctetes presents surviving his loneliness as an accomplishment, one unparalleled by any glorious deed at Troy. So my argument, which you'll be following on your handout, deals with three strands in the play's discourse on heroic excellence. So the first strand is what I will call the Iliadic excellence that comes from fighting at Troy. And in particular, it's the glory of sacking that city. That's strand one. The second strand is something that comes from Philoctetes' head, and it's a kind of inner nobility that can endure Philoctetes' wound, which is personal, or it can also be achieved by remaining near to it, someone else staying with him for the sake of acting nobly. So that's the second strand, this inner nobility of enduring Philoctetes' wound. And the third, which closely intertwines with the second, is the private sense of heroic endurance, which I argue was forged in Philoctetes' experience of solitary illness over time. So we have the excellence of being a fighter and the glory of sacking Troy. We have the contrasting excellence of acting rightly, showing one's inner goodness in spite of sufferings, which we will see noble men would consider to be glorious. And lastly, which is most important to our consideration of solitude as an attainment, the heroism of Philoctetes enduring his isolation and illness for 10 long years. Okay, so we're finally at the handout. Long intro. Let's begin with the end. When Heracles appears at the end of the play, he connects Philoctetes' sufferings directly with kleos, glory. This is passage 1 on your handout. First, I will narrate for you my fortunes, how when I had labored and passed through so many toils, I came to possess imperishable excellence, as you can see. Also you, understand well, you had to suffer this to make your life glorious, euklees, through these toils. So Heracles compares Philoctetes' sufferings, you had to suffer this, with his own toils, ponoi, and his imperishable excellence, athanatos arete. And he claims that Philoctetes' toils, too, have made Philoctetes' life glorious, euklees. So I want to explore these claims of Heracles against the backdrop of the play's depiction of Philoctetes' suffering and of heroic excellence. And you'll see in this speech a bunch of Homeric buzzwords, and that's what we're going to be tracing. This is a pro-Greek school. We're leaning into the Greek. So as you will remember from reading the Iliad, I hope, the context, this Homeric understanding that's being played with here of excellence, is that you display your arete, your excellence, in battle or in speech, that you then receive gifts of honor, geras, or in plural gera, from your community in recognition of that excellence. The gifts And this is what I think is so hard for us to understand, but the gifts are the honor. It's not like you have the honor. The gifts are the honor. The communal recognition is everything in Homer. And through all this, you win a public reputation that may outlast your lifetime and give you a kind of immortality through fame. This is kleos aphthiton, right? Undying glory. So let's keep this background in mind and these buzzwords. Early in the play, Philoctetes learns from a lying Neoptolemus that his awful situation, supposedly, is unknown. Sorry, it's supposedly unknown. It is awful. This is passage 2 on your handout. Then you don't know my name, nor the reputation of my evils, any of it, the evils because of which I am perishing for so long. Oh, how wretched I am, how hateful to the gods, since even though I am like this, no news of me has reached home, nor anywhere in Greece. The word here for reputation is kleos. There's no reputation, renown, fame of my evils. Note the special note of distress in this exclamation. Even though I am like this, he says, my plight is not widely known. And after this lament, Philoctetes begins to sharply contrast the Iliadic heroism of the leaders at Troy with the nobility of what we might call inner goodness. And he sets up a kind of typology. Neoptolemus' father, the dead Achilles, is noble, eugenes, well-born. And the other dead or inactive men at Troy are valiant, agathos, Nestor, and virtuous, Christoi, so Ajax, Antilochus, Patroclus, and the like. On the other hand, the living heroes who are still at Troy are wicked. So this is Odysseus, the sons of Atreus, Menelaus, and Agamemnon, people like this. They're poneros, and they're unworthy, anaxios. They're base, kachos. And at the end of this exchange, Troy is synonymous with baseness. The Greek leaders are bad people, those who are still alive. And those who continue to fight, they're wicked and unworthy. This is the typology that Philoctetes sets up. So Philoctetes here is rewriting heroism away from excellence in war and towards a kind of inner goodness. And this continues in the play. So Neoptolemus pretends, a few bits later, he pretends to be leaving. And Philoctetes supplicates him in terms of the good or the worthy, which he calls glorious, elklees. So this is the adjective that's related to kleos, glory, which is the same adjective, elklees, that Heracles used to describe Philoctetes' life at the play's end, which we saw in passage 1. Despite the disgust that Neoptolemus and the other sailors will feel because of his disease, Philoctetes exhorts the young hero, this is passage 3 on your handout, nevertheless endure, since you know to noble men, shamefulness is hateful and goodness is glorious. And for you, if you forsake this, there will be ignoble shame. But if you do it, O child, you will have the greatest prize of noble glory, elkleas geras, if I go alive to the land of Oetia. So Philoctetes here uses Iliadic terms for publicly recognized excellence, geras, that gift of honor that you're given when your excellence is being recognized, kleos, that reputation that can outlast your life. But he applies them to what will likely be a private endeavor, doing what is honorable, being Christos, by bringing Philoctetes home instead of abandoning him to a life of pain and loneliness. Such behavior would be the exact opposite of that of the other Greeks, who abandoned Philoctetes to live with his diseased foot unaccompanied. This is passage 4 on your handout. Philoctetes awoke, finding no man at all in the place, no one who might assist me, no one who could take part in my illness with me when I am wearied by it. We see Philoctetes dividing people into 2 types, and each of them have different spheres of glory. One group is populated by base men who can't endure to share in the suffering of wounded men, of a wounded man, and these are the men fighting at Troy who are there winning public renown. The other group so far consists of Philoctetes alone, right? Someone who can handle being with Philoctetes. But in Philoctetes' personal sphere, as he sees it, glory could be achieved. This el kleos geras, you could achieve glory by sharing in his suffering and bringing an end to his loneliness. At this point in the play, we're still far from Rilke's glorious solitude, but we do see the personal character of the goodness that Philoctetes wants Neoptolemus to share in, something achieved so far only by Philoctetes himself, this strange description of it as something that will earn Neoptolemus the greatest prize of noble glory. This rewriting of heroism in terms of a private sense of excellence becomes clearest about a third of the way through the play, after Neoptolemus first agrees, which is a fake agreement, he's pretending to agree to bring Philoctetes home. And Philoctetes is overjoyed, and he wants to first show him his cave before they leave. This is passage 5 on your handout. Let us go, child, after we show our respect to the place within, my dwelling that is no home, so that also you may know me, what I have survived on, and how I am by nature stout-hearted. For I think that no other man except me could endure these things, not even taking in the sight of them alone with his eyes. But I have gradually learned through necessity to embrace evils. Philoctetes claims a special excellence of endurance for himself, even as at the same time he hopes Neoptolemus will share in it. He declares that no other man, even just looking at this, could endure what I've endured, could live on what I've lived on. This reference to survival, the things that I've lived on, points us to Philoctetes' bow, which is a complex object with a backstory. So Philoctetes is using the bow to shoot down birds and small animals, which he then crawls to and eats. And I think it's important for us to realize how degrading this is as a way of living for an ancient Greek. Food was very communal. So think of the social institutions like the symposium. This whole idea, like, I'm just gonna eat my bento box lunch while watching Netflix. This is not a Greek virtue. And so Philoctetes' isolated living, and the way he describes it, is basically inhuman for an ancient Greek. Yet at the same time, the bow represents Philoctetes' heroism, and this is in its backstory. So he received this bow from Heracles when Heracles was greatly suffering. He was being burned up, and he builds this fire, and he needs someone to light the fire for him. And the end result of this will be an apotheosis. He'll become a god. And the only one who will light the fire is Philoctetes. So it's this act of what's construed as heroic friendship that was recognized by the gift of the bow. So Heracles, as a god, gives the bow to Philoctetes. Also, interestingly, through this bow, we are invited to also think about Heracles' characteristic toils, right? The labors of Heracles, those difficult endeavors that he suffered through and that were the context of his excellence. So as I see it, the bow, together with Philoctetes' current use of it to survive, pulls together these 3 different strands in the play's depiction of excellence. So it represents straightforward heroism, doing great deeds and being recognized for them. It also represents that inner goodness, showing oneself to be noble by proving oneself a friend and a helper. And thirdly, the bow represents that special understanding of heroism which Philoctetes claims for himself, the excellence where heroic deeds are ponoi, difficult toils, things that you endure, and that make up the heroism of Heracles. So these three associations all emerge when Philoctetes grants Neoptolemus permission to touch his bow. This is passage 6 on your handout. And we're still in the portion of the play where Neoptolemus is pretending to agree to bring Philoctetes home. And he asks to touch the bow. And Philoctetes says, "What you speak of is holy, child, and it is lawful. You who alone have granted to me to look upon this light of the sun, who grant me to see the land of Oetia, and my elderly father and my friends, you who, when I was beneath my evils, raised me up beyond them. Take courage, these things are in your power, both to touch the bow and to return it to the giver, and to boast among mortals that you alone handled these weapons on account of your excellence. For I, too, came to possess these by acting nobly." At the moment that Philoctetes allows Neoptolemus to touch his bow, he binds Neoptolemus even more tightly to his own brand of heroism. He evokes Iliadic heroism with the word boast, euchomai, which is seen very often in Iliadic fighting scenes. But the excellence, arete, in this type of heroism is bound up in deeds of philia, of friendship, in acting well as Philoctetes acted towards Heracles. Insofar as the bow represents heroism, heroic deeds, this passage runs counter to the rewriting of heroism as heroic endurance of solitude. It's strand 1, heroic action. But at the same time, the bow evokes Philoctetes' private sense of excellence, doing the right thing, which for Philoctetes is a special understanding of endurance that he's forged by keeping himself alive in complete solitude for 10 years. So we will now turn to this third and last strand in the discourse on heroic excellence, the question of time spent alone. Philoctetes constantly reminds us that the noble abiding with him and his illness, our second thread in this discourse on suffering, has been something he has done alone for 10 years. The play often uses the imperfect tense to describe the ongoing, persisting nature of his suffering. So I wanted to keep this to a single page handout. So flip back to handout 2. You see in that passage that he says that there's no reputation of evils, the evils because of which I have been continually perishing. This word, diolumen, is in the imperfect. It's this ongoing suffering. The chorus likewise describes his ongoing dying in the imperfect with a kind of horrified wonder. This is passage 8 on your handout. I've never heard of any man who was likewise perishing in things equal to this so worthlessly, that ongoing sense of suffering. And the chorus in the very same stanza adds that Philoctetes has been utterly alone in doing this. The link between the length of time and constant aloneness are not stated explicitly in every passage that emphasizes how long Philoctetes has endured his evils. But I think the play intertwines the sufferings of his illness and his aloneness so constantly that we can hear them resonate in these passages about duration. So you can look back here at passage 4, where he talks about being alone. He awoke alone, but he talks about it in the present, abiding with my illness now in the present as then 10 years ago, right? Here I am, I have absolutely nobody. And with this in our ears, just 30 lines later, he zooms in on this length of time issue, and this is passage 9 on your handout. But I, wretched, this is now the present tense, am perishing for the 10th year now in hunger and in evils, consuming this devouring sickness. And there's a really nice enjambment in the Greek, which I didn't give you, but between wretched and year, talas etos. It's like pulling us through this line end to emphasize the duration of his suffering. Likewise, his use of the present, apolumai, suggests both the ongoing process of suffering and his really miserable identification with what he has so long endured. Not, I have been perished, but here I am continually perishing. Philoctetes' cursing wish that the generals suffer what he suffered likewise underscores this duration. This is passage 10 on your handout. He wishes, oh, you two generals, Agamemnon, O Menelaus, how would you, in place of me, nurse this disease for an equal length of time? So this passage in the Greek can also be translated as if only you in place of me. But it's really not clear why we translate wishes like that. And it has been suggested that we, at the same time as someone is wishing for something on someone else, they're wondering how it could be accomplished. And this here, Philoctetes is wishing that the sons of Atreus endure in equal measure the sufferings he has endured, and he links it specifically to time, ton ison chronon, for an equal length of time. And as I said, there's this ambiguity that at the same time as he wishes it, he asks how it could be accomplished. So even here we see a kind of hint of this boast of a private endurance of suffering. They couldn't have done this. I've done something that no one else could do, as he explicitly said earlier when he invited Neoptolemus to look at the cave. And it's a real contrast between these 10 years seeking renown in battle at Troy with his own lengthy nursing of his disease. Perhaps the most striking claim about duration comes in that earlier passage, passage 5 on your handout, when Philoctetes uses the verb promonthano in line 538. So this verb really crowns that passage when Philoctetes invites Neoptolemus to share in his heroism by looking at his cave. And this cave has evidence of his stout-heartedness and his unique endurance of deprivation. Philoctetes explains, but I have gradually learned, promonthano, by necessity, to embrace evils. This learning over time explains, in Philoctetes' conception, the process by which he became stout-hearted. It is not only his nature that makes him uniquely good. It is specifically because he has been enduring for so long what no other man could have endured, debilitating illness and complete isolation for 10 years, that he has been schooled in this peculiar, awful, and yet unparalleled form of heroism. And just a footnote here also on the Greek of stergein kaka. So stergein is a word for love. I've translated it as embrace. And it's kind of a strong translation. There are a lot of people who want to translate this as tolerate because of the negative connotations in kaka, not connotation, denotation of kaka. But I think that that's really, we're getting rid of difficulties if we do that. And that every time this phrase appears in Greek plays, it makes perfect sense to translate it more actively. And I think here the active translation of embrace accords or fits with the active verb promonthano. I've learned over time to do something. Philoctetes is saying this is something I've learned to do. No one else could even look at this life of isolated illness, but I've not only survived stout-hearted, but I've gotten to a place here. It's a really strong claim of a very, very particular kind of excellence for himself. The paradox in the play is that Philoctetes keeps associating Neoptolemus with his private form of excellence, and having a companion removes the solitude, which has been the context, and so in part the content, of Philoctetes' heroic endurance of suffering. Nevertheless, Philoctetes seeks, it seems to me, to bring Neoptolemus into his whole heroic type, in which nobility has been tested and learned through 10 years of surviving alone and in pain. Towards the end of the play, Philoctetes compares the hamartia, the error which Neoptolemus commits because he knows how to do nothing except what he has been commanded to do. He compares that hamartia to Philoctetes' own sufferings as if they are equal. Even Neoptolemus' wrongdoings are a form of sufferings like the miseries of Philoctetes. They give this as a kind of example of, it's a counterpoint in the play. The play is full of these gestures outwards, efforts to be in community. And it is absolutely clear that Philoctetes wants to be in community. But at the same time, Philoctetes alone has been the sufferer, the endurer, the one who has learned how to live so wretchedly, without becoming base, deceptive, and cowardly like the generals at Troy. He constantly pairs suffering his wound and suffering loneliness. In trying to convince Neoptolemus to help him, he asserts that Neoptolemus shares in a form of heroism like his, and he claims a form of renown for this goodness. To kreston elklees, that was in passage 3. Even though rescuing Philoctetes would likely not be spoken of, at least not favorably, and would certainly not garner the renown of sacking Troy. So we return to Heracles. This is passage 1. In the god's closing speech, the play links Philoctetes' language of endurance with kleos, glory. You had to suffer this to make your life glorious through these toils. Heracles' words pick up on an earlier claim of the chorus. It's passage 13 on your handout. But now he has met the son of noble men and will become happy and great from going through those things. And the through is the Greek preposition ek. It's really astonishing. It's not in spite of or after, but this is a translation by Seth Shine, out of and because of. These two speeches together confirm Philoctetes' private notion of excellence, and they wed it to the more Iliadic type, the public kleos that is recognized far and wide. The chorus's use of the adjective megas, great, from going through these things, also brings us back to Rilke and his description of Solitude's greatness, both in its vastness, by nature to be alone is to be completely alone, and in its making you great. And to repeat yet again, Philoctetes never wanted this greatness, and he desperately wants to alleviate his loneliness. We haven't traced the theme of healing, but Philoctetes' boasts of endurance interweave with his tremendous desire for his pain to end, both the pain of his wound and of his isolation. Nevertheless, his boasts are real claims, and we have seen how they characterize his solitude as a place of unique possibility. Solitude allows the sufferer unparalleled opportunities to live in an ongoing way heroic endurance, and thereby to display his nobility, his goodness. On this account, loneliness is part of the substance of Philoctetes' personal heroism, and it is part of what will confer on him unparalleled renown. Thank you.